All right, good. Well, thank you guys for coming. Be sure to just help yourself to the beer and the food. And we're enjoying doing this. I'm telling you, I had a blast putting this one together. You can see the books I've used and are referencing in here. This was a lot of fun for me. And so I'm excited. Woo! Excited. I do need to thank the sponsors, Kukin and Windsor. I was doing a video out there today, and that's Austin and Kristen. They do all my videos. That's Ocular Pop. They're very talented. Round of applause for Ocular Pop. Way to go. But we were talking, and Kristen was like, you need to do a video on just like good moldings. And I've done some on moldings and talking about it, but it's really hard to get good moldings, okay? And so Kukin and Windsor, I've known them for a long time. They're friends, I like them, and they also get it. They've got good moldings. And so if you need good moldings and, well, I'll do a video, but it's really hard to get good moldings today. And so they do that, and they have these boards and all this stuff, and they're good people. And so come on, right up front, interrupting the whole thing. Oh, well. Thank you guys for coming. So anyway, good people. I'm proud to have them as sponsors on this deal. We are studying the Romantic era. And so I did a lot of research here about, there is a ton of change that's happens, okay? And we are getting into the Victorian era, okay? This is the beginning of that. Last time was Greek Revival. If you look at where we are here, we did the Georgian one, the Federal run, the Greek Revival. We're now into this area right here, Victorian, okay? Victorian kind of gets a bad name. It's kind of either people love the style or they hate it. And so there's things about it I love it and things about it I hate it. But I've split the Victorian into two parts. And we've got this early part, which is 1830 to 1870, essentially right around. Do you want to just pick up these chairs and move them back there?
Yeah.
Let's just do that so you're not sitting on the front row. And so there is. Now you are. And so we've split up this Victorian into two areas, and this is the first part of it. And what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of change the design side of it, and you're going to see a lot of change on the building side of it and all the technology that's happening. So basically what we're going to be talking about, this Romantic era. Why is it called the Romantic era, this picturesque era? The three styles we're going to be studying, the Gothic, Revival, Italianate, and Second Empire. We're going to have a quiz in the second episode of this, and we're going to try to choose the style. Victorian's really hard for me to recognize and go, what style is that? What's going on? The Victorian era is, in my opinion, the McMansion era of this time, okay? So they're influenced by all these things. Second Empire is obviously French, Italianate is Italian, Gothic is Gothic, but they're the influential, there's Persian, there's Egyptian, there's all these different revivals going on there. Why? Well, the world's opening up, right? You've got steamer ships now, you've got railroads, and the world's grown smaller, and they're looking out, going, what can we be inspired by? So just realize the Victorian era, I think people look and go, that's a Victorian house, but it's not, what kind of Victorian house, and we'll get into more of that. But it's confusing for me, and so I suspect it's confusing for a lot of people. We're going to be talking about Town and Davis, Ithiel Town and A.J. Davis, two architects, very different types of architects, but they really are the beginning of the architectural profession and when this all changes. Remember, we talked about Bulfinch and some of the other guys before. Those guys couldn't make a living in architecture, right? They couldn't do it. And so these guys are kind of the first era of being very successful architects. And then we talk generally in these buildings and brews about masonry or moldings or ironwork. We're actually going to talk about the steam engine and what it does for manufacturing. So what's happening in America? I've picked 1860 as this kind of time period. We're growing. Like, you think what happens to the U.S. in a period of 100 years is we go from an upstart colony to a country by 1780 to a world power 100 years later, right? It's kind of crazy. I mean, there's no other example in history of a upstart nation growing to be the biggest, the most powerful, and what we did. And it's fascinating, and it obviously changes what we're building. You think about the growth, we went from 13 colonies now to 26 states, and by 1860, we've now taken over the whole country. We'll show you maps of that. New York's still the fastest and growing, and it continues to be. We're really changing from the handmade to the machine made. And so this is the beginning of the end for that old handmade era. And we start to see industrialization taking place in building. Balloon framing, we'll talk about that, it's kind of fun. And then sawmills, and of course the architects become these influencers. And there's this Andrew Jackson Downing, not Alexander Jackson Davis, okay, two guys, A.J. Davis, A.J. Downing, they end up being the Martha Stewarts of their era, right? They end up becoming extremely influential. So look what happens to the U.S. We were here, and by 1860 we're here. This map shows, this is, the Louisiana Purchase was right in here, and then the California, it became a state 1850. 1859 for Oregon, right? You see these different, we have all this west to conquer and all this stuff going on, but we're growing very fast. Our population has exploded, and we've got all this growth taking place. Look what's happened as far as the biggest cities. The top 5, right, are East Coast cities that are kind of the old hat, they've been there for a while. Look at the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. New Orleans, Cincinnati, St. Louis, Chicago, New York, okay? I think it's the next map. These guys there's St. Louis, there's Cincinnati, there's Chicago, there's Buffalo, okay? All the other things are over here, right? New York and Boston and everything else. The country is expanding this way. And so, there's kind of this perfect storm of what's going on here. I've got this thing drawn up somewhere. Kind of what's happened in our country. And Cincinnati kind of represents the perfect storm here of what's going on. In this period, okay, we have industrialization because of the steam engine, and the steam engine changing how things are built, how people think about things, and Americans especially are advanced and industrious, and they overcome so many things. Example, by the way, the best book, and the book I read it and then I listened to it, and it's just fascinating. It's this book called The Dawn of Innovation. Highly recommend it. He talks about how America really becomes this world power, and it starts with a bunch of little things. An example that they use is the American system of manufacturing. What that is basically trying to find a company who can make replaceable parts, okay? And think of making a gun, and being able to make all these parts that are exactly the same, that are interchangeable. So shoot 3 guns, take them apart, mix the parts up, and shoot 3 guns again, right? It was unheard of. You can't do that. Americans, the way they approached that, by 1850, Samuel Colt, basically with his pistols, had figured out how to do it, and was the marvel of the Crystal Palace Fair in 1851 in England, where England's showing off all this stuff, and this upstart American comes along with a pistol and shows Europe how to do it. In fact, the guy points out in this book that even by 1920, when Cadillac brought 3 cars over to England, drove 3 cars, took them apart, changed the parts, and then drove them again, it just blew their mind, okay? That kind of puts you in there, and that's 1920, right? Puts you in the mindset of how Americans approached building and thinking about doing stuff. the British and the Europeans were so far ahead of us, and yet we caught up in a very short period of time. And there's an American ideal, I think I say, the face of our country emerges. It's fascinating to me how innovative we were about things and how it surprised Europeans. Part of it, and this goes back to this whirling storm of craziness going on, is that we allow an immigration. That, you know, that Tocqueville, remember he came through and wrote his little story about traveling through America. He's fascinated by the fact that there really is no class structure. That you don't have to be, blue blood in order to achieve things. You look at Andrew Carnegie. He started out as a mailroom boy. You look at Cornelius Vanderbilt. He was a scoundrel, and yet these guys were, industry leaders, and it just astounded the Europeans kind of how we thought, and there wasn't a class structure. So you see all these things that are going on in this period: industrialization, the steam engine, the American approach to manufacturing. Transportation is changing really fast, and so you have this. I'll show this example of Cincinnati, but transportation is huge in this whole era. That there's a rising middle class. Okay, the fact that we are building the houses that we're building has to do with you have people that can afford them and want to do it. This is the first time we have suburbs, right? And so, most times if you're looking at 1800s in Boston, these cities, they're townhouses. They're houses where a craftsman might have is living upstairs and his shop's in this open window. The fact that you'll see these houses that are out in the suburbs, they're really just outside of downtown, but they are, this is the first time that starts to happen. Front porches, right? Front porches weren't really a thing until this period. So there's so many crazy innovative things. Immigration, it's just crazy how fast we were growing. There was 6 million immigrants between 1820 and 1860, I think, and then between 1860 and 1900, there's like 23 million. Well, realize our population's 31 million in 1860, and you consider that 20% of those came in through immigration. Our country is exploding, right? Very big. Now, Cincinnati is kind of the poster child of what, and it's a microcosm of what America's doing. Cincinnati is founded in 1788, so basically 1790. In 1800, it has 850 people there, okay? By 1840, it's the 6th largest city in the U.S., okay? How does that happen? It goes 850, 2540, 9642, 24,000, and then 46,000, okay, by 1840. And it's the top 10 size of city in America for like 30 years. Essentially what happens is in 1840, okay, first of all, Cincinnati is on the Ohio River, okay? And so the point of this thing was showing you that St. Louis is on the Missouri River, Cincinnati is on the Ohio River, Chicago's on Lake Michigan, Buffalo's on Lake Erie. These are all connected by canals, right? By the 1820s, 1830s. So 1840, the steam-powered paddle ships, right? Which means that someone in Ohio can go all the way over here and go to St. Louis and down to New Orleans. Forgot about New Orleans down there. New Orleans is the 5th largest. So you have all these cities that are growing here, and it's all because they're on transportation lines, okay? So 1840 paddle boat, about 15 years later, the canals open. Basically, the Miami-Erie Canal was started in Toledo and came down here and connected Lake Erie to the Ohio River. And then by 1850, it's the railroads. And so you had this city that was just, it was growing by, I think, 150% or 100% each year, something like that. It was just exploding. And that is just a microcosm of what America was doing, right? Immigrants coming in, and realize that the immigrants coming in were middle class, okay? They had owned stores in Germany. They had been craftsmen, and they'd had a skill. You had the potato famine in Ireland. A lot of Irish people came over. You had a lot of Germans coming over at this time. So the immigration that's coming in are highly skilled and people that are ready to throw in and work hard. So all this stuff is happening. It's a storm. It's crazy. All the change that's happening so quick. And, just realize as we talk about all these changes that are going on, that this is happening very quickly. So I had this as our advertisement thing. This is Thomas Cole. He was the Hudson Valley School of Artists. But this is kind of the ideal, okay? And we're going to see a change here from this strict and civic Greek revival to this romantic view of America, right? And this is of America and how people thought about America. You think about some of the other things that were happening this time. James Fenimore Cooper's The Last of the Mohicans, 1820, which is all about man in nature and, out on the edge. Thoreau's Walden was 1854. It was all about getting out of the city, going to this, this cabin in the woods and basically living, very naturally. Ralph Waldo Emerson was a very influential philosopher, wrote about nature in 1836. And then our two guys, Alexander Jackson Davis was a return to nature guy. And you'll see in his books and things like that how he, just remember this picture because A.J. Davis's book is very similar to that. And then Andrew Jackson Downing was a horticulturist. He was a writer for a landscape magazine. And he had the most popular books on horticulture and landscaping, if you can believe that. He reminded me of Martha Stewart because he was speaking about interiors. He was speaking about furniture, and he was talking about fruit trees, and he was talking about how you made a home. And so it's very interesting what he was doing. So these are all Thomas Cole. Look at the romance and the idealism of nature and of outside and what's going on. And certainly this one with this, ancient Greek temple, in an idealized landscape and Thomas Cole painting there, it speaks for this romantic era. So we'll be talking about these three styles. Any questions about America at that time or comments? So it's evident that there was a rejection of this, okay? That there was a rejection of this Greek revival. There was a rejection of how stern it was and how mathematical it was. And so you have this change, and a number of things are happening here. This is Lyndhurst. This is a famous Greek revival building done by Davis. But you have these contrasts between this, romantic versus the practical, artistic versus the engineered. And so there is great interest in this more romantic style of architecture. It's a romantic ideal, just like those paintings, right? It's the romantic ideal of the Gothic, of the Italian, and of the French, all flowing into the house. So the Gothic Revival will be this first style we talk about. Remember that this palace burnt down in 1840, okay? They rebuild it in the Gothic style, okay? This speaks to the power of the Gothic. And there was a lot of debate in England about whether this was going to be a Greek temple or whether it was going to be something more English and more Gothic, the Gothic-sized one. Now it was designed by another guy, but Pugin was was responsible for the interiors. Now Pugin, and you'll begin to see this. Now look, realize that some of the things I'm talking about, we're going to be talking about all the way into the arts and crafts period with William Morris and Gustav Stickley and certainly Ruskin. I think I'll bring Ruskin in here, who speak about the morals of architecture, and who speak about what architecture should be and what it should represent. So Pugin was a moralist, right? And his whole thing was that this was closer to God, okay, than another style, a pagan style like a Greek temple, right? And so there is beginning to see this influence, and certainly the arts and crafts guys are rejecting all of this ornamentation, are going to reject all of this stuff, but they're going to use some of the guys like Ruskin, like William Morris, to speak more about the arts and the crafts, okay? Because you'll see, especially next time, it's over-industrialized. They feel like they've lost their soul to the machine. And so realize that this is going to be a conversation we're going to be having for 60 years, 70 years. So Westminster House is rebuilt. It's led by a Pugian. Ruskin is also a strong promoter of the Gothic style. He wrote a book called The Seven Lamps of Architecture, which are really 7 moral ideas that architecture should be: strength and morality, and different ideals of what architecture should be. These are kind of the details. This is Virginia McAllister's book. I've got a number of architectural styles books. There's a Marymount. There's a professor who emails me after that. I don't know if you're watching, Bob. I appreciate it. He gave me some recommendations of some other books. So I'm using Virginia McAllister's books and these other books to highlight some of these details. This steep pitch, certainly this detail right here, this is the barge board or verge board. These were sawn out. These pieces couldn't happen without industrialization, okay? Realize that a lot of these styles, they don't have the ornamentation and detail without it. The peak-topped windows with the hooded ornamentation, sometimes this cresting and this turret details the battlements. You'll see clustered columns. You'll see all these different Victorian elements showing up in the Gothic Revival. Now, this is one at, where is this? Historic Richmond Town in New York. And I went there when I was at North Bennett Street. Hood moldings over the windows, this Gothic peak, certainly your verge board or barge board with that kind of ornamentation, and that would have been made on a bandsaw, right? That would have been made in a shop, definitely would have been made that way. Gothic Revival. Now, of course, they're going back and they're looking at historical buildings. This is Notre Dame before the fire. The details that you're going to see here, this rib ceiling, right? These clustered columns, see how these columns are grouped together. Tracery, which is what's in these windows here, where you have that sculpted detail where the windows are broken out. So all of these details are things that you'll see in this style, right? So you see the verge boards. There's a trifoil, hooded window, clustered columns, right? You got the turret molding here. Right, all of these details show up in this Gothic style. More fun stuff here, an oriel window. That's kind of an important detail. You see the hood moldings over this top. This kind of tracery in between the columns. You got a spandrel with the trifoil in there. All of these details. Now, I've picked out Gothic Revival houses that are pretty easy to pick out. You're going to see some that aren't quite as easy. Now, this one. Did anybody know about this house? It's the Wedding Cake House in Kennebunkport. It's a famous house. Now, it's most famous because it's Federal House underneath. Okay, you see that fan line? I mean, that's such a strong Federal detail. And this Palladian window above. So apparently it's a Federal House, 1790, 1800s. And by 1850, he had been inspired by the Greek Revival, obviously. Sometimes called the Wedding Cake House, but he overlaid on top of this all this Greek Revival, stuff. There's all kinds of things you can go on in here. But this kind of speaks to this generation, right? Because it is, look what I can do, right? You could never do this 30 years beforehand. Yet, because of the machinery and industrialization and stuff like that, it's actually accomplishable, right? And it's just, there's a pride and there's pride there, right? And so, as much as it may look garish to us today, that was pretty hot stuff back then. Another Greek Revival, right? This kind of vertical board is very popular in that time period. You see the oriel window with the tracery. See these windows that have that kind of leaded glass design detail. Certainly these kind of finials and things that would go up from the top are very important to that time period. but this on the vertical siding, that's a very popular detail.
Were the colors as vivid back then?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Victorian colors are bad. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole nother talk, and a lot of very earth colors and bold colors. Colors on colors. I mean, one of the reasons in the arts and crafts period they stain grade stuff is because this is just too much, right? It's just like, it's a rejection of all of that, and they want to get back to that stain grade, that natural, let the beauty of the wood set come through. But yeah, you'll see some other pictures that's kind of over the top. This is Lyndhurst. This is one of A.J. Davis's thing. Clustered columns here, right? Battle tournament here, tracery in the windows. I mean, you've got hood moldings here, very Gothic Revival. And here's the inside. You know, speaking of colors again, right? It was a. I want to give them cut them some slack, right? Because there was a lot of excitement about what they could do and what they could make. I mean, realize you could never do this 20 years before, and so they're kind of going, oh my gosh, yeah, I mean, the world's my oyster. I can do whatever I want. Yeah, so that's fun. Italianate, that's the kind of the main styles in this period are Italianate and Gothic Revival. Okay, if you look at the pattern books and what they're writing about, and Greek Revival. Now, you know, we talked about in the Greek Revival talk, Benjamin Latrobe. Benjamin Latrobe, he did Gothic Revival things. He did Italianate things. He did Greek Revival things. And so all these guys are speaking that same language and doing that stuff. I'm highlighting these particular styles, but realize that Davis did styles like this, as he's most well known for the Gothic, but he also did Italianate stuff. Now this is, you know, they're looking to Europe, they're looking to Tuscany with the tall towers and, you know, this kind of styling. You see a lot of arch windows here. The bracket detail is the clear giveaway. When I walk up to a house, I'm kind of wondering what style Victorian it is. If it's got brackets under there, it's almost always Italianate. So Italianate was a very popular style. It could be done on a very high style scale, and it could be done very simple and clean. But you know, this is kind of a very high style, Tuscan style. But the bracketing under here is one of those details that's really important and really part of that tradition. And you'll see a lot of arch windows and arch details in this style. This is an Italianate house. This one's a little bit confusing because you've actually got a tower with the Second Empire roof on it. So the Second Empire, as we'll see, has this mansard roof detail up here, but the bracketing under here is kind of really defining it in the Italianate style. And that one. This one's Italianate, right? You see the arch windows, you see the tower bracketing underneath there. This one looks like it's from Italy, right? It's not, it's the Milo house. But again, the tower, bracketing under the eaves, all part of that. It looks like a Tuscan villa. It's kind of what they're trying to go after and what they're looking for. And this one is another one that's a little bit hard to, it doesn't stick out to me as a clear Italianate style house, but the bracketing here and here, certainly under this thing, they've just got other frivolous, like this is kind of a Greek detail. And so that cresting on the roof. And so they can be a little bit confusing, just so you know. And then Second Empire, I was in school when we were learning these different styles, it was always tell the Second Empire because of this mansard roof. And so you'll see some of the things like, well, you go, is that Italianate? No, because we got the mansard roof going on there. Mansards can be a number of different styles, right? Those you'll see a convex mansard here, you see a concave mansard, sometimes it's straight. There's some S curves that you'll see, and so a lot of different things, but basically, I mean, you still have towers in this style. The towers and the turret are really a part of the Victorian era all the way through. You think of the Queen Anne's with their turrets and things like that. It's very popular to that style. And we'll talk about this when we talk about balloon framing, but it's balloon framing that allows them to build houses like this, right? Because before they were all timber frames, and you really couldn't affordably timber frame this house out. It has to be done with, stick framing and balloon framing. So we'll come back to that when we talk about the building side of it, but that's kind of all part of what this looks like.
The difference between balloon framing and timber framing, the timbers were like 4x4s or 6x6s or
8x8s.
8x8.
Yeah, and I'll show you some examples.
And the balloon framing was 2x4.
Mostly, yeah. Alice, do you have a question?
Can you repeat his question so people online know what he said?
Yeah, his question was, what's the difference between timber framing and balloon framing? It's the size of the timbers, and he was asking what size they were. And I was saying we're going to go through that here in a second. I'm going to actually show you some timber frames and what that was doing. Again, Second Empire. There you see kind of a different little mansard roof up there, but that's a very pretty Second Empire house. And it's going to get confused. I don't know if your eyes, they're starting to all look the same. You'll even be more confused next time. Terrace Hill, very famous Second Empire house. Again, you see this tall tower, but certainly this mansard roof as it runs around here defines it really in that style. 1869, right at the edge of our time period. So Gothic Revival and Italianate. Italianate lasts pretty much through the period. Second Empire doesn't start as early as the Gothic or the Italianate, but it lasts a little bit longer. And then this is a house in Newport, and talk about crazy interiors and details that are. I mean, this is Newport, so this is very, very expensive Second Empire house. So, any questions about those styles?
I've got a question. It looked like, for the most part, these were all flat roofed on top.
Well, it's not quite flat, but you're right. It does go up and it's pitched on top. They would have been lead coated most likely, but they would have gone up, and at the top of those towers, as it goes up, unseen to the eye, you would just have a roof like that that'd be pitched. Yeah, just a light pitch at the top. So yeah, no, that's good eye. Okay, so we talked about design influences, and we've been following along with who were the architects, who was doing stuff. This is kind of the Greek Revival period. The big guy was Benjamin Latrobe. And we have all these other guys who are still practicing in this era and who are still building things. Okay, Ithiel Town is someone who is who we're going to focus on here. He goes to Asher Benjamin's building school in New York and trains under Asher Benjamin, goes back to New Haven, Connecticut, and really starts his career there. But all of these guys, I don't want to pass these up that, those guys were Greek Revival. They're still practicing. Robert Mills is into the 1880s, 60s or 70s. Thomas Walter practiced for a long time. So all these guys are still practicing. They're just not as famous for the Gothic Revival and these other styles. And what I really find, I don't remember if you remember us talking about this, but the national capital, okay, really goes through a huge transformation in this time period. This is them getting ready for the Lincoln inauguration, okay? So it goes from a timber frame building, okay, very small, that was designed by Charles Bulfinch about 1820, so that 30 years later, it's a steel constructed dome. It's twice the size because they've got all these states and all these new representatives coming in. And so the Capitol just explodes. Here again is a small picture of what's happening in America. Now, what that means is that there's a split in focus in architects. And really, Ithiel Town focuses more on commercial things because he's more of an engineer. And A.J. Davis focuses more on residential things because becomes much more influential residentially than he does commercially. So this is the first split. There's a second split that happens later in the 20s where architects are kind of choosing their side. And Ithiel Town and Robert Mills and some of these other guys mostly do civic buildings. And we'll see that. And then these other do residential stuff. And it's because of the rising middle class that these guys are gaining an influence through writing and everything else. So Town and Davis, right? Ithiel Town and A.J. Davis were the most famous architecture firm in America at this time. And they were the first ones to really start making money. I alluded to that before, is that, Charles Bulfinch, it's kind of sad to read his story because he just couldn't get a break and never made money. And, it was very difficult to make money as an architect in America early on. It's really 1830, 1840, rise of the civic buildings, the rising of Washington. Ithiel Town and Davis do a lot of state buildings in Indiana, North Carolina. And so you see these guys rising up and finally making it. These guys are very wealthy. Ithiel Town is stupid rich, and for good reasons too. So he was kind of the engineer. As I said, he trained under Ashton Benjamin. He goes back to New Haven, Connecticut, builds a couple churches there. We'll look at one of them in the Gothic Revival at a fairly young age. He patents a bridge. Okay, it's called the Town Lattice Bridge, which basically allowed people to cross rivers and kind of build a bridge kit, for lack of a better word. And I'll show you more about that. But he gets rich because of that patent. And anyway, he's the senior member of the Town and Davis group. He hires Davis when he sees Davis's drawings, and that's very important. But Ithiel Town is on his way out as Davis and Downing are on their way in. What? Someone say something? One of his first houses that's kind of a Greek revival, right? Not necessarily Gothic or anything else. This is 1810. This is the church he did in 1813. Obviously, very Gothic revival, right? And then the other church he did on the same was a very James Gibbs, very traditional. And so he could design in both styles. He was people appreciated him for his engineering mind more than for his design mind. You don't really see a problem with his designs there, but he was much more famous for being an engineer. Now, his lattice bridge was basically, the idea was that instead of having these main beams that go across, you had a lattice system, right? Where you could basically take boards and run them all together and basically create a bridge. You had a couple piers in there, but it was self-supporting, and the lattice kind of held everything together. If you're going to come late, you're going to have to...
I didn't know you guys were doing this. Here, carry on.
So we got this lattice system that he invented, and these bridges were being built in Europe. This one's in Salt Lake City, I think. And so one of my first jobs in... I was a school teacher in South Kent, Connecticut, teaching English and coaching soccer. This is Bull's Bridge, right by where we lived, and this was a lattice bridge made by Ithiel Town. So it's still in use. They've done a concrete bottom, but the sides and the roof are still part of the structure. So he was very influential, and he was collecting patent money from this design. He updated, he improved his design in 1835, but he is basically now at the tail end of his career by 1830 when he and Davis start getting together. And so anyway, this is what made him famous, and this speaks to his engineering mind. A house he did obviously in the Greek Revival style. They did a number of civic buildings together, and this is really more Town's thing, but this is the North Carolina State Capitol. This is the Customs House in New York. So they were architects for about 6 years. The Wordsworth Athenaeum, this is obviously speaking to the Gothic style, right? So you see that Gothic building is now a museum. And this was his personal house. And here resided the greatest library in America, maybe in the world. They've said his library was better than John Soane's. So once he started getting money from his patent, he started traveling to Europe. He started collecting books. And when I was doing the research, they'd write about his books, and there was never a clear inventory of what he had, but it's thought he had 11,000 volumes, okay? My library right there has like 3,000. So if you want to get an idea of how big it was, it would have come out to here, all the way back in there. Just a tremendous number of books. John Soane, who was an architect in London, was said to have the best library. His was said to be better than that. So he was a collector. He was trying to figure out where to give it. He ended up giving a lot of his library to Columbia. But anyway, very, very jealous personally to have seen that library and to see what he was doing there. This was a painting, Thomas Cole, right? Remember the romantic artist, painted by Thomas Cole for Ithiel Town, architect, showing the different styles, Gothic, the Greek and all the different styles. There's Egyptian back there. Apparently Ithiel Town didn't like this and didn't accept it. Not sure what's going on with that. But that was Ithiel Town. Now, Alexander Jackson Davis, he's his partner. And the way they became partners is Alexander A.J. Davis went to art school. And his art teachers were basically telling him, you don't want to be an artist. You need to be an architect, because he kept gravitating to art buildings and designing things. And so he goes to town and says, can I do some renderings for some of your projects? And town goes, yeah, let me look at them. And sees them and goes, okay, yeah, why don't we become partners and start working together? And so they become this very influential architecture firm. He writes a book called Rural Residences, which we'll look at. He's most famous for the Gothic Revival. He does some Italianate stuff. And then later in his career, he works with Andrew Jackson Downing, okay, who's the horticulturist, and it's Downing who really explodes the style and is really the promoter. So this is the customs house he did with Town in New York. But this is his book, okay? So Rural Residences, I think this is 1840. You might not look at it, but this is significant, okay? Why is this significant? Well, the way he is picturing the house, okay? The way he's showing that with the landscape and the shading and the drawing. Remember, I don't know if we remember talking about Bullfinch and some of his drawings. They were really crude. In fact, we don't have really many drawings from their era. And certainly detailed drawings of elements and details aren't found. And so we know that, and we'll compare them to Asher Benjamin drawings, but this was an incredibly artistic way of approaching design. And look what he also does here. Explanations, estimates, and a specification. Now, this is the real split that you see happening, that we go from the master builder who controls the job and handles all things to the architect who writes specs that tell them how to build, right? So this is monumental, okay? This is big, right? The roles have flipped. The architect's gone from someone who can't make money to someone who is designing and defining what houses should look like. It's crazy. This would be examples of the houses, right? That you'd have rooms laid out. There's rooms that he has furniture layouts and these things. But these would always be accompanied with a specification. But who's he appealing to here, right? It's not the builder, it's the homeowner, right? And so he is, again, the focus now has been that the homeowner is remember the rising middle class, right? They get to determine what they're building. And he is, there's a guy with a stroller there, right? And so no builder wants that in their picture. So this is him promoting this lifestyle. Notice too that it's in the country, okay? That is not, in the city, right? That you have, that landscaping is very important. And Downing, who writes a book on horticulture, which basically fruit trees, is a bestseller, right? Let me say that again. Fruit trees is a bestseller, right? It's kind of crazy, but it speaks to the interest of the homeowner at that time and what he was interested in, what he was learning and doing. But again, you're seeing Gothic Revivals things. Gothic Revival, there's an Italianate house coming up. This is one of his Italianate houses from the book. This is where it got built, right? Winya, I guess that's how you say that. It's about 1840. So he was mainly doing in the Gothic Revival and the Italianate styles. Blandwood Mansion, Italianate, right? You see the tall tower. You see the not heavy bracketing underneath this, but certainly in that style. And then this is, of course, Lyndhurst. This is one of his famous Gothic Revival houses on the Hudson River. He did about 3 houses in a row. Obviously very high style. Able to do a bunch of different things here that were crazy. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Llewellyn Park. It's in New Jersey. We were really lucky to have a client call us, and he had bought a house in Llewellyn Park. 1920s. It was a colonial revival house. I go there, and this is in the park, right? Driving through here, Andrew Jackson Davis, Alexander Jackson Davis, I'm going to screw that up all night. So A.J. Davis, I'll just go with that. This guy basically buys this tract of land just outside of New York. It's in New Jersey. And he basically creates this park because A.J. Davis is so influential and because he's doing so much stuff. He has Davis design this whole thing. And so when you drive in the gates, you see, rustic little, gazebos like this. There's benches and chairs all over this place. It is a park, okay? This is the suburbs, right? This is the new suburbs. We're not in the city. We've gone out to the suburbs. This is the first development that influences developments for 100 years, right? So Llewellyn Park is a huge deal as far as the first time in America where you begin to see things like this. This is the gate to Llewellyn Park. I mean, it still looks very similar to this. There wasn't a horse-drawn carriage, though. But it was very idyllic, right? It was very beautiful to drive through. You wind up through these hills. It was very hilly, and all of a sudden you come to these little vistas. It was amazing what he had done in that short period of time. So, design books change, okay? And this is where we see a split. This is important because we're talking about the two changes that happen, design changes and building changes. And just to finish up the design changes, we're going to notice the difference between these design books and what's happening. This is Asher Benjamin's book, 1830, okay? Rural Residence is 1840, okay? Asher Benjamin's, Menard Lefevre, their books go out of print in 1850, okay? Very popular for a time period, but the important part, because they're written to builders and because they're interested in the Greek Revival style, they are very mechanical, okay? Compare that, right, to Davis's drawing of a house, right? I mean, this is what a builder, I don't need all that crap. I just want the, just the guts and bones, and I just need to look at, right? That's what this house is. It follows Palladio's ideas as far as the proportions of the room, right? And then basement, all the basement, kitchen, 17 by 21, right? It's just the hard facts. This is not a book for homeowners, right? This is a book for homeowners, right? And so you have this builder's pattern book to the house pattern book and this changing of who controls what design is. Builder pattern books were very concerned with the orders, right? They're concerned with picturesque drawings, right? They're wanting to convey this idea of what this house is. Very symmetrical. These designs tend to be asymmetrical. This was only classical, only Greek Revival, only federal. You didn't have the Gothic or Italianate. This was for builders, this is for homeowners. So we have a change that's taken place in design in this short period of time, and it's overwhelming. The design influence, Ithiel Town, he's an engineer. He focuses on these things, and there's a lot of interest in an engineer architect at this time period. A lot of state capitals being built and things like that. He's the artist, he's the residential side, and then he's the horticulturist. Front porches, I talked about those. Front porches weren't around before these guys came around, right? The front porch was very important because they were talking about the inside and the outside of the house. Specifications, I talked about that. Growing cities. Downing is the guy who inspires Central Park, right? Downing dies very early. Olmsted, Frederick Law Olmsted, Downing was his hero, right? And so Central Park gets put in place because of Downing. The DC Mall, he came up with a plan to change the DC Mall from this European garden where it's very straight line and very ordered to this, jungle, rustic, rural thing. It didn't end up doing, but you can see his plans for it. It's fascinating. That speaks to the level of influence he had as a tastemaker and everything else. Any questions on design before we get to building? There's beer in there if you want to get some beer. Okay, so changes to building, right? I've got this picture. This is a tool museum in France, okay? And what struck me was all these different axes, and these would have been for timber framing, right? Everyone was custom made, okay? Everyone was made by an individual. He would go to either an axe maker or just a blacksmith and say, I need the handle to be this short, and I want it to be round, I want it to be curved. But they would have determined, okay, each one of these things was custom made, is my point, right? In our period we're going to, the hammer basically is invented, right? You don't really have hammers like being the major tool in a carpenter's bag until we have cut nails, okay? So building is also going to change a tremendous amount in this period, but before this, everything was handmade. Tools were handmade, everything was custom. Then you begin to get industrialized, and it changes quite a bit. What changes it the most is the steam engine. It's my kind of focus for this time. Early steam engines were invented in the early 1700s. They were used for pumping water out of a coal mine where water would fill in, but the coal was right there. Very inefficient machines, didn't work very well. Maybe had 5 horsepower of power. James Watt's improvements in 1774 improved things and continue to improve. And so James Watt's first steam engine wasn't very powerful because he was afraid to compact the steam enough, and so the pressure casing that would hold the steam got better and better and better and better, and that's what allows steam engines that start to show up in the U.S. mills in the 1830s, 1840s, is because of James Watt's invention. The coreless steam engine, early in 1849, it's used into the 1950s, 1960s, and there's iterations of this style that are still being used, the coreless engine. This is what a mill looked like. Okay, what's going on? What's going on? I think I drew a picture of a mill. Basically, before this time period, a mill looked like, especially a water mill, basically was on a river. Okay, and so you would have this mill sitting right here. And they would gate, there's a gate here in this river, okay, that would come along, and they'd have a gate here that would swing in and swing out. So the river's running along here, and they would build these water gates that would open up and then power this water wheel. There's a shaft that runs through here, okay, and then that shaft runs up to a large belt system over top, and then those belts come down and do individual machines, right? So that would have been a water wheel machine, but this concept is what the steam power guys used, that early on the steam power mills couldn't drive a shaft like this. That very quickly they figured out how to do that. And so what's happening is you have a steam mill somewhere out here running underground that runs up and starts turning all these shafts. And if you've ever seen one of these machines, basically these belts hang loose and just kind of flop, and then you push in and engage it, and everything starts up, right? So it's a pretty ingenious system, but this is what a manufacturer mill, this is later, this is probably 1900, 1890, but some of these things where they're making stair parts and different things here, but this is where they're going, right? And this is what allows us to build, or them to build the way they were building. Kind of crazy. So how did these show up in catalogs, right? It's because of the machinery and because of the things I've said before. By 1860, every machine that we use in our shop down in Benbrook was available back in, okay? So you'll see some examples of that. Early molding machines. This is, I think it's 1850. That one's 1850s. Notice the parts, okay? It's a combination of wood and metal, okay? So the very early 1840, 1850 machines were a combination of wood and metal. You begin to have, at this time period, portable machines, because the steam engine can be portable. You actually are able to take a steam engine and go into the woods and actually cut trees down and do things like that. This is where, this is, what's that, 1870s, right? So by 1870s, that's a molding machine. I've seen machines that look like this, right? I can't remember the name of the thing. Our first molding machine was a machine like this. That was like a 1920s or 1930s. The design didn't change very much. I had a joiner with a wheel exactly like that was adjusting my table. So this design and these details, happens back then. They're talking about in this book. This article is written by, I think I got the guy's name. I'll need to give him credit. Anyway, it's an APT article, Association Preservation Technology article that he wrote talking about the influence of machines. But they were saying that this Gothic kind of tracery, right, that would have been in a window wasn't possible without this machine. So these shapers, these spindle shapers that would allow you to drop a frame onto a knife and then cut this profile out, was what allowed them to do the designs and the details that they were doing. So very influential machines. So the most important machine is a molding machine, right? Making flooring. Making flooring like this was a huge deal, where you could actually tongue and groove and make it flat, because before you were basically fitting boards down into, you think about your joists running along, they would shave a little bit here, they'd shave a little bit there. They didn't have that clean line joist, drop boards down, throw them together, tongue and groove. They were doweling boards together, 40 years before this. And so huge advancements in the speed and the ability that they would have because of these machines is overwhelming. I include this one because what year is 1854? That's a duplicarver, right? So they would have had a sample here, but this thing, router heads coming down and duplicarving things out, right? 1850s. That's crazy. And that's a dangerous machine right there. A wood table, knives coming out of that thing. Yeah, I could digress about some ugly stories. So that's manufacturing, okay? Manufacturing is exploding, it's changing. The nail is the other thing that maybe even a bigger advancement, okay? Remember that hand-wrought nails before 1800, were hand wrought, were handmade. Okay, nails were very expensive. I'm not sure that some reason they didn't timber frame and invent blue framing before this was because the nail was such a problem. There's stories of them burning houses down so they could get the nails, right? And so it's that kind of value that you would have in these things. They mostly came from England. There was home industries where people would buy nailing stock and then try to make nails during the winter. This cut nail is a huge advancement, and basically what it is if this is a plate of steel, they basically had a metal shear come down, and they would clip the nail. So this shear would come down and clip. You'd flip it over because it was coming down at an angle, and it would cut another nail on this angle, and then they'd drop it down in and put a head on it. It was, huge. I don't know how I can express how huge that is. But they were making nails by the thousands now, okay? And so we always use it as a dating tool. Like I always look, okay, if it's the 1890s and it's a wire nail, right, I know that building's probably after 1890s. If it's a cut nail, I know it's after 1820, right? And so we use these at North Bennett Street to actually date houses and when they were made. I still look them at it for moldings and details and figuring that out. We see in Texas a lot of cut nails in older buildings, but mostly wire nails. But this is a huge advancement as far as how they're doing things.
Some of those nails have blunt tips.
Yeah, in fact, the blunt tip, yes, you can see the blunt tip here and there. The blunt tip, if you've driven many nails and wire nails, sometimes wire nails will go through and actually split the wood because it's so sharp and going down. The reason why they think that there was wire nails invented in the 1870s, but they couldn't get traction with them because carpenters liked these, and they liked them because blunt force go through there and it wouldn't split the wood. And a wire nail, like we'll take wire nails, or we did when we used wire nails, and we would blunt the tip of the wire nail and then drive it so it didn't split the wood open. Because it was like a chisel going down there and just split the wood open. So yes, they did have blunt nails or blunt heads. And it's interesting, some of the things that they would write about wire nails would be, it doesn't leave as big a hole in the wood, it's faster, it's cheaper, but they couldn't break the carpenters from using those things, the guys that had grown up with them and liked them. And all this has to do with balloon framing, okay? So let me jump forward. So there's three types of framing that we have in America. We have timber framing, which is this. We have balloon framing, and then we have Western deck framing, okay? And so balloon framing lasts until about 1830, 1840. Now, if you Google, because I did, balloon framing, you'll see that it was invented by this guy in Chicago, okay? Not true. I don't think it's true, okay? Obviously, I can't prove it. But timber frame, basically the way it was made is that you had these large timbers. Corner timbers was 10 by 10, 10 by 12. You'd have big queen posts and king posts and everything going through there. Everything was braced, okay? And so all these bracing and everything's mortise and tenon, so it's like a large piece of furniture, okay? A lot of skill. You had to have house wrights who would actually know how to install and know how to build a frame, okay? When balloon framing came along, balloon framing is basically, remember they've got great trees back then, okay? And so they're not there's no finger joining studs at this time period. So they had studs that could be 20, 25 feet long that were straight and or old growth wood. And what they would do is they would cut in a notch. I don't know if you can see that. So the stud would run up all the way from the ground, and then they would take a 1x6 or 1x4 and notch it into that wood, okay? So they would, if this is the 2x4, they would cut out this notch and they would put a 1x6 in there, and then they would run their joists over that 1x6. Can you see that? Does that make sense? So they would hang their joists, okay, the second floor joists on that ribbon band that would run through there, okay? So it meant that houses could go up very fast. Balloon framing is a derogatory term, right? It's that it's a balloon that's going to float away. It's not made very well. And so this lasts from about 1840 till about, 1920, because California framers started building in decks, okay? And they would build up 10 feet, they would floor it, joist it, and do everything, and then build a second deck on top of it. Now, the advantage of this western deck, and one of the reasons why they changed, is because of fires. And what would happen is if a fire started down here, there was no fire breaks, and fire would run right up the walls into the attic, and the house was lost very quickly. Now, fires were a big problem and a big deal, and so over time they started putting fire breaks in, but they changed to this western style framing. It's called western style framing because it was invented out in California. It was growing very fast. But balloon framing, back to its invention, this is Fred Peterson. He wrote this article, and I agree with him 100%. Because I don't think balloon framing was ever invented by anybody. I don't think one guy goes, you know what, I'm going to tell my friends, and everybody's going to know I invented it, okay? We were growing so fast as a country, okay, there's no way anybody invented it, okay? And what you have, and what he did is he went through and started documenting houses from different periods, and what you would have very typically was that the bottom floors would still be large joists. You'll see them spec'd out as 4x6 and 6x8 size floor joists. The walls being all stick framed and then the roof being stick framed. So it was a combination of timber framing and stick framing that was happening from the 1820s into the 1880s. And so we don't think it was this guy in Chicago who had this, light bulb moment who figured out that we could build faster. Realized that we were growing so fast. One of my books, if you want to read a page turner, Great Lakes Lumber on the Great Plains. I'll let anybody borrow the one for it. Basically, they talk about lumber yards starting in this time in the 1850s in Minnesota. What did they do? Okay, you have the railroads coming in, and a railroad would create a head and then would push out, 20 miles to a new town. The first thing they did when they brought there is they brought lumber. And the first thing on the railroad cars was lumber, and they would start throwing these towns together and putting them. But the reason you can nail a house together is because of the cut nail. So by 1820 you have cut nails, and by 1840 you start to see balloon framing just going everywhere. It doesn't take as much skill, right? It doesn't take as much talent to put these together. It can go together much faster. The house wrights in Boston and New York and some of the major towns fought to keep timber framing happening because they were losing their job. Because all of a sudden, any knucklehead, according to them, could nail together a house and put it up. There's a reason why part of it is it was a derogatory term. But that's the difference between those different styles. Did that answer your question?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Any questions about balloon framing? basically it allows these houses to go together very fast. Now, realize too that you couldn't, and I talked about this earlier, but this is a result of balloon framing, and this is an example of timber framing, right? Most of these early Georgian and federal houses were boxes, okay? They were, it was a simple way to put these together. To timber frame that, oh my word, right? That's too much work. And so this style of architecture that comes out during this period is partly design driven, but also partly technologically driven, that they could, right? They were able to build these houses fairly easily, and they hadn't been able to before. That's a big deal. Any questions about that technological change? So this house to me represents this period. This represents the desire on the part of the homeowner to do some of the things he was seeing take place. And it shows the exuberance and the excitement of what new technology could do. I'll make the comparison next time, and I'll actually show you the difference or how similar Victorian houses are, especially in the 1880s and 1890s with McMansions of the 1980s and 1990s. It is fascinating how similar they are. In one you have the industrial boom, the other have your technological boom. You have newfound wealth, new materials. I mean, it's crazy that, you know, how similar they are. It's very interesting. So houses that would have shown up, this is an 1860s catalog. This is this catalog if you want to look at it. Try not to spill my beer. It's a Palliser house book. There's another Victorian architecture book. These are pattern book and design books from the 1860s to the 1870s into the 1880s. And these are typical pages, right? What style is that? Second Empire, right? Second Empire, right? Mansard roof, right? And notice these details, right? And how they're showing that they could be made. They're introducing the Gothic style. They're showing these things off. These can be made by 1860s. All of these things are an excitement and an ability to design and build, and that's what they were showing off and selling. So, design-wise, we have this architect rising to be the leading designer, successful, able to make a living, lead designers. This romantic ideal, which is the break from the classical. And so if you think about that classical era and the handmade era, Georgian Federal, Greek Revival, that really stops, right? And you don't see that classicism again until, maybe the 1900s. And so with Beaux-Arts and some things like that. The suburb starts a new home style. Home designs come from a lot of different sources too. You'll have ladies' journals offering home designs. You'll have this ability for the lady of the house, the homeowner, to look at a number of different sources for designs to come from, and that really just continues. And then morality in architecture is a big thing that Pugin and Downing and some other people were really talking about. It's very important. And as far as the building child in this era, this industrialization, that storm of change that was taking place really passes up the builder and craftsman, right? It passes up. There's just too many things going on. Houses are being built too fast. Cities are growing too fast that there's not it would be impossible for a guild to last during this time period. There's just too much offering, too many things going on. The building designer becomes the builder, right? So the master builders, you have Asher Benjamin, you have Samuel McIntyre, who design the house, craft the house, build the house. These guys, that goes away, and all they are is assemblers and builders. The craftsman becomes an installer because they're no longer crafting things, they're going to a mill or lumber yard and picking things up. So I lament as a craftsman this age, right? Because it's the end of craftsmanship, beginning the end of craftsmanship, but I also marvel at this age of what they were able to do and the excitement about it. Any questions? I don't know how long I went. That was an hour. That was good. Any questions, Alice?
No.
Yes, sir.
Did they abandon the proportion systems and the Victorian?
Good question. He asked, did they abandon the proportion system? In some respects, yes. Okay. I mean, it was the builder books. They were all about proportion and scale. They were going to the canon of architecture that the Ionic system goes like this, right? You don't see that in the Downing books and things like that. They're just not there. So, as a culture and technologically, they all still understood those systems and the rule of thumbs and things like that. But I should probably include some classical ideals in the Victorian era. I mean, the way that they would construct a porch classically, or using proportions, it's just completely different. It's done with crazy brackets and moldings, and you can look at it and go, okay, well, that could be an entablature, and I'll show some pictures the next time of how they would do that. But it was very different. But they understood the proportions. They didn't practice them the way they had done before. Yes, sir.
I don't think Fort Worth has a lot of buildings from this period, but are there any examples of these styles?
It's a good question. I think the best examples, I was trying to find some and I ran out of time, is the Texas courthouses, right? So they go back to, there was a bond in the 1870s to build courthouses in Texas, which started that whole boom that lasted about 20 or 30 years. So 1870 is a little bit late. I think there's some Second Empire courthouses that are around. A lot of them. I don't. Yeah, Granbury is. That's right. Yeah. So Second Empire, you don't really see Gothic Revival, right? But we'll see a lot of. We'll look at more of those and the next Victorian one. We'll see examples, Romanesque, and a bunch of different styles that are there. So, any other questions? No, I think Second Empire. That's what I was thinking of when you said Granbury. We worked on Parker County. Pretty sure it's Second Empire. But no, that's a great question.
I said Ellis County, Washington.
Oh, no, it's Romanesque, if anything, I think. We worked on that one too. Any other questions? Thank you guys for coming. Thanks for being a nice audience. The next one is December 16th, so less than a month away. We're trying to pack Victorian in, and then next year we're going to be in arts and crafts and talking about that. Thank you guys. Help yourselves some beer. Thank you so much.